I need you to drop whatever you're doing right now. Listen to something that could completely change how you think about the years ahead of you. Leave a comment below and tell me what decade of your life you're in. Your 60s, 70s, 80s. Because what I'm about to share applies differently depending on where you are. But it applies to everyone who thinks their best days are behind them. Here's what society has convinced you: that after a certain age, you're supposed to slow down, lower your expectations, accept limitations, basically wait for your health and energy to decline, while you try to manage whatever time you have left as comfortably as possible. That narrative is not just wrong, it's destructive. And I'm going to tell you why everything you've been told about aging is based on outdated assumptions. Assumptions that no longer apply to the reality of how people can live and contribute well into their 80s and beyond. But first, let me share something personal. Something that changed my entire perspective on what's possible as we age. I want to tell you about the most important conversation I've ever had about aging, about achievement, about what it means to live a meaningful life in your later years. It wasn't with a doctor, it wasn't with a researcher, it wasn't with another entrepreneur. It was with my grandfather, who at 94 years old taught me something about ambition and possibility, something that has shaped how I think about human potential ever since. My grandfather spent most of his life believing that major accomplishments belong to young people, that innovation, creativity, and the ability to tackle big challenges naturally declined with age. He had internalized the same messages that most people absorb, that your productive years happen in your 20s, 30s, and 40s, and that everything after that is about maintenance rather than growth. But something changed for him in his late 80s. Instead of accepting the narrative that his useful years were over, he decided to learn something completely new. He taught himself woodworking. Not just basic carpentry, intricate furniture making, because he had an idea for custom mobility aids that could help other seniors navigate their homes more safely and comfortably. The project took him 3 years to complete. He was 91 when he finally opened his small workshop, and 92 when he had helped his first 100 neighbors with custom walkers, grab bars, and adaptive furniture. But the remarkable thing wasn't just that he had created something useful at an age when most people assume creativity and problem-solving abilities have diminished. The remarkable thing was how those 3 years of intense learning and problem-solving had transformed him as a person. His memory was sharper, his energy was higher, his sense of purpose was stronger than it had been in decades. He had discovered something that research is now confirming: that the human brain and body are capable of remarkable regeneration and growth well into the 90s and beyond. But only if we challenge them with meaningful work and continued learning. The biggest mistake I made, he told me shortly before he died at 97, was believing for so many years that my best work was behind me. I wasted 20 years thinking I was too old to learn new things or solve new problems. Those were supposed to be my retirement years, but they became my greatest years once I stopped acting retired. This conversation fundamentally changed how I think about aging, about capability, about human potential. It made me realize that most of what we believe about the limitations of aging is based on cultural expectations rather than biological realities, and that people who reject those expectations and continue pursuing challenging goals often experience their most fulfilling and impactful years well after the age when society tells them their productive life should be winding down. What I've discovered since then is remarkable. Through my own observations and through stories from people I've met, we're living through a historic shift in what's possible for human beings in their later decades. People who are 65 today have fundamentally different capabilities, different life expectancies, different opportunities than people who are 65 even 20 years ago. The old models of retirement, decline, and gradual withdrawal from meaningful work are based on conditions that no longer exist for many people. Yet most people your age are still operating according to those outdated models. They're accepting limitations that aren't real, avoiding challenges that could energize them, and settling for comfort and maintenance when they could be experiencing growth and achievement at levels they've never reached before. Let me tell you what I've learned about why your greatest years might actually be ahead of you, and what you need to do to make that possibility a reality instead of just an optimistic fantasy. The first thing you need to understand is this: the relationship between age and capability has changed dramatically in ways that most people haven't recognized yet. When previous generations reached their 60s and 70s, they often did face genuine physical and mental limitations. limitations that made continued high-level performance difficult. Life expectancy was shorter, healthcare was less advanced, and the accumulated wear and tear of physically demanding jobs and less healthy lifestyles meant that many people really were experiencing significant decline by the time they reached what we now consider middle age. But if you're 65 today, you're likely healthier, more energetic, and more mentally sharp than your parents were at the same age. You have access to medical treatments, nutritional knowledge, and lifestyle interventions that can maintain and even improve your physical and cognitive function well into your 80s and beyond. More importantly, you have access to opportunities. Opportunities for meaningful work, creative expression, and intellectual challenge that didn't exist for previous generations of older adults. Changes in how we work and live have created possibilities for learning, creating, and contributing that aren't limited by physical location, traditional career structures, or age-based discrimination in the same ways that limited previous generations. This means that many of the assumptions you have about what's possible for someone your age are based on conditions that no longer apply. The script that tells you to wind down, lower your expectations, and focus primarily on comfort and leisure was written for people whose circumstances were fundamentally different from yours. But here's what I've observed. Most people your age are following that outdated script anyway. Not because they have to, but because they believe they're supposed to. They retire from meaningful work not because they're no longer capable of performing at high levels, but because retirement at 65 is what they've been told represents success and the natural progression of life. They avoid taking on new challenges not because they lack the mental capacity to learn and grow, but because they've accepted the narrative that major new undertakings belong to younger people. They focus on managing decline rather than pursuing growth, not because decline is inevitable, but because they've been conditioned to expect it, and to see any attempt to fight against it as unrealistic or undignified. The result is that millions of people who could be experiencing their most fulfilling, impactful, and energetic years instead spend their 60s, 70s, and 80s in a kind of voluntary diminishment, a diminishment that wastes their accumulated knowledge, wisdom, and capabilities. Let me tell you about someone who represents exactly the opposite approach, someone who decided to reject the conventional script about aging and instead pursue the biggest challenge of her entire life. Well, after the age when most people assume such challenges are no longer possible. When I met Sarah Chen, she was 73 years old. She had been retired from her career as a high school mathematics teacher for 8 years. Sarah had followed the traditional retirement path. She had stopped working at 65, moved to a smaller house in a retirement community, and spent her time on hobbies, volunteer activities, and visits with family members. Sarah was comfortable, financially secure, and reasonably content with her life. But she wasn't energized. She wasn't growing. She wasn't being challenged in ways that made her feel fully alive and engaged with the world around her. The turning point came when Sarah's granddaughter, who was struggling with advanced mathematics in college, asked Sarah for help with a particularly complex problem. As Sarah worked through the problem with her granddaughter, she realized how much she missed the intellectual stimulation, the stimulation of solving difficult challenges and helping people understand complex concepts. But instead of just resuming tutoring or volunteer teaching, Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone who knew her. She decided to start a community learning center. With the goal of creating a place where people of all ages could come together to learn from each other, where her decades of teaching experience could benefit not just struggling students, but entire families. Sarah's family and friends thought she had lost her mind. Why would someone in her 70s take on the stress, expense, and time commitment of starting something from scratch? Why would she choose to compete with established educational centers that had been around for decades? But Sarah had recognized something that her family and friends hadn't. She had advantages that younger entrepreneurs didn't have. She had decades of practical teaching experience, deep knowledge of how people actually learn, and the wisdom that comes from having worked with thousands of students over her career. More importantly, she had clarity about her purpose and freedom from the career pressures that often distract younger people. She wasn't starting this center to get rich or impress anyone. She was doing it because she saw a need in her community and believed she had the experience to fill it. The 3 years Sarah spent building and running her learning center were among the most intellectually stimulating and personally fulfilling of her entire life. The combination of working with people of all ages, seeing families learn together, and creating something that genuinely improved her community gave Sarah a sense of energy and purpose that she hadn't experienced since her early years as a teacher. I realized that I had been wasting my retirement years on activities that were pleasant but not meaningful, Sarah told me. I was staying busy but not staying challenged. I was maintaining my comfort but not growing as a person. Building the learning center forced me to use skills I hadn't used in years. And the challenge brought out capabilities I didn't even know I still had. Sarah ran her center for 5 years before passing it on to a younger colleague she had trained. The programs she created continued to serve families in her community, and she spent her remaining years consulting with other communities who wanted to start similar centers. But the most remarkable thing about Sarah's story isn't just her academic achievement or the impact of her educational programs. It's the transformation in her energy, health, and overall vitality that resulted from pursuing a meaningful challenge at an age when most people assume such challenges are no longer appropriate or possible. Sarah's blood pressure improved, her memory sharpened, her physical stamina increased, and her overall sense of well-being reached levels she hadn't experienced since her 40s. Her doctor told her that the cognitive demands and sense of purpose associated with her graduate work had likely added years to her life expectancy and significantly improved her quality of life during those years. Sarah's experience illustrates something crucial about human potential in later life. We don't decline because we get older. We decline because we stop challenging ourselves in meaningful ways. The human brain and body are designed to respond to demands. When we place appropriate challenges on our cognitive, physical, and creative capabilities, those capabilities adapt and often improve, regardless of our chronological age. But when we remove challenges and allow ourselves to settle into routines that don't require growth, learning, or problem solving, our capabilities atrophy much more rapidly than they would decline through aging alone. This is why I believe that your greatest years may actually be ahead of you, regardless of what decade you're currently in. You have advantages now that you didn't have when you were younger. Wisdom gained through decades of experience, clarity about what really matters, freedom from many of the social and financial pressures that constrain younger people, and the perspective that comes from having survived challenges and setbacks that seemed overwhelming at the time but that you successfully navigated. If you're in your 60s, you potentially have 20 or 30 years ahead of you, years to apply this accumulated wisdom and experience to challenges that matter to you. That's longer than many people's entire careers, and it could be the most productive and fulfilling period of your life if you approach it with the right mindset and strategies. If you're in your 70s, you potentially have 10 to 20 years. Years to pursue goals and projects that could define your legacy and provide meaning and satisfaction that you may not have experienced during the years when you were primarily focused on building financial security and meeting family responsibilities. If you're in your 80s or beyond, you have the opportunity to demonstrate what's possible for human beings at advanced ages, and to serve as a model for younger generations who will themselves face the choice between decline and continued growth as they age. The key is to reject the narrative that tells you your best days are behind you, and instead embrace the reality that your accumulated knowledge, wisdom, and freedom could make your coming years more impactful and fulfilling than any you've experienced before. But this requires making choices that go against social expectations and cultural scripts that assume people your age should be winding down rather than ramping up. You need to identify meaningful challenges that will stretch your capabilities rather than settling for activities that are merely pleasant or comfortable. You need to continue learning and growing rather than assuming that your knowledge and skills are complete and that further development is unnecessary or inappropriate for someone your age. You need to pursue goals that matter to you personally rather than limiting yourself to what others think is reasonable or realistic for someone in your situation. Most importantly, you need to take care of your physical and mental health, not just to avoid problems, but to maintain the energy and clarity required for continued high-level performance and contribution. The people who experience their greatest years in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond aren't lucky or genetically gifted. They're people who decided to reject conventional expectations about aging and instead pursue the possibilities that exist for people who maintain ambition, curiosity, and commitment to growth, regardless of their chronological age. Your greatest years are ahead of you if you choose to make them your greatest years. The question is whether you'll make that choice, or whether you'll continue following a script that was written for people whose circumstances and opportunities were fundamentally different from yours. But here's what I need you to understand. Making that choice isn't just about deciding once. It's about deciding every single day. Every morning when you wake up. Every time you face a challenge that makes you want to retreat into comfort. I've watched too many people make the decision to pursue their greatest years, only to abandon that decision the first time things get difficult, the first time someone questions their choices, the first time they feel tired or overwhelmed. That's why I want to give you something practical, something you can use starting today to turn this decision into daily action. First, stop waiting for permission. From your family, from society, from anyone. You don't need anyone's approval to pursue meaningful work, to learn new skills, to start something that matters to you. The people who love you want to see you engaged and energized, not settled and slowly declining. Second, start small, but start today. Don't wait until you have the perfect plan. Don't wait until conditions are ideal. Take one small step towards something that excites you. Make one phone call. Research one opportunity. Have one conversation. The momentum from small actions creates the energy for bigger ones. Third, find your community. Surround yourself with people who are building something, learning something, contributing something. Age doesn't matter as much as attitude. A 75-year-old with vision and energy will inspire you more than a 45-year-old who's given up on growth. Fourth, protect your health like the precious resource it is. Not so you can avoid problems, but so you can pursue opportunities. Exercise regularly, eat well, get enough sleep, manage stress. Your body is the vehicle that will carry you through your greatest years. Take care of it. Fifth, embrace the learning curve. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to feel clumsy at first when you try new things. That's not a sign that you're too old. It's a sign that you're growing. Every expert was once a beginner. Every master was once a disaster. The choice you make today about how to view your remaining years will determine everything that follows. You can choose decline and settlement, or you can choose growth and contribution. But you have to choose, because time doesn't wait, and your greatest years won't happen by accident. If this message resonates with you, I need you to do two things right now. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss insights like this. And share this video with someone in your life who needs to hear it. Someone who's been told their best days are behind them. Someone who's accepted limitations that aren't real. Because the truth is, we need you. The world needs people with your experience, your wisdom, your perspective. We need you to show younger generations what's possible. We need you to solve problems that only someone with your background can solve. We need you to mentor, guide, and inspire in ways that only come with having lived and learned and grown. Your greatest years aren't just about you. They're about everyone whose life you'll touch when you decide to make them great. What meaningful challenge will you pursue to make your coming years the most fulfilling of your entire life?